welcome to Sky's the Limit, and I'm your host Sharmeen Ali. This week we are bringing to you a young entrepreneur who is a co-founder of Easy Bike, and this is a new venture in Pakistan, something very different in which we'll have our guest explain to you what it actually is. But the reason that we're bringing these young entrepreneurs to our program now in the next couple of programs is due to the fact that we want our viewers to see that there's a young generation over here who's out there trying to make a difference in Pakistan and who's trying to bring new things, new ideas and new concepts which have worked across the globe, and now it's time for them to come to Pakistan and to start operating over here. So today I'm very proud to introduce Syed Mohammad Hadi, who is a co-founder of Easy Bike. Thank you so much, Hadi, for joining us on our program today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Right. So what we were just talking about now, this is something new for Pakistan, and you and your friend Ali Moin are partners in this. You're both co-founders and you started this. We're going to talk about your business and how it works and everything and its future here. But first we want to know about you, because our viewers want to know what makes someone like you, who's clearly, been all over the place, all over the world, come back to Pakistan and start something like this in an environment that can often be uncertain. So just tell us a little bit about now your background, your life as, growing up and all. You started off as a kid in Islamabad, a regular kid in Islamabad, right?
Yeah, I grew up in Islamabad. I did my schooling here. And then I went to the States for my college education, and after that I stayed there and worked in, I worked in London for a couple of years, then I worked in New York for about 13 years.
Okay, now, so when you were in Islamabad, you went to which school?
I went to Beacon House primarily.
Okay.
Spent a year or so at Frobels, and then I did my A-levels at Islamabad School of Arts and Sciences.
Right, okay. So I'm sure a lot of people in Islamabad can relate to you because, it's a small place, and also they'll be like, oh, I went to school with them and things like that. Now, after that, you went to the United States to study. What did you study over there? Which university?
I went to Augsburg University in Minnesota, and I studied business and economics.
Okay, business and economics. And then after that, you continued your education in New York.
Yeah, I did my MBA in New York from Columbia University. I did it after quite a number of years, actually, because after my undergrad I started working in banking.
Okay.
And then it was probably about 7 or 8 years later that I did my MBA.
Okay, so was that investment banking that you were in?
Yeah.
Or, okay,
yeah.
Right. And your family here in Pakistan, what were they into? Is this something that you got from your, say, a family legacy or something, or is it something completely different?
That's such a great question, because I think that our peers, right, and our mentors are so important in inspiring us and going on a certain path. And you often find that families have a certain area that they focus on. Some people are business families or they're professional families. So for me, my father's a doctor, and so we didn't have a strong business culture in our family, but I did have some relatives who were bankers, and they kind of steered me and mentored me towards it. But I think that's such a great point you raised, because there's that saying that you're the average of the 5 people closest to you. So I think that's a very, very important point. Your peer group is always going to determine what your horizons are. And I certainly found that living in Islamabad, your priorities, your values, what drives you, was certainly different than what I experienced once I went into the States. And at each stage of my life, once I was doing my undergrad, once I was working in New York, once I was doing my MBA, I was coming up across different peer groups, and they were motivating me and inspiring me differently. Because ultimately, as human beings, we pick from a menu of possibilities that we see, and that's primarily through the people around us. So exposure to other groups who are doing certain things with their lives is highly motivating if you're going towards the right peer groups.
Absolutely. So let's start with Islamabad, your 5-member peer group. Who would that be? The reason I'm asking is because we see a lot of young people growing up around Islamabad. Some people end up doing great things and others don't. So obviously you're someone who we see as a success story, because you're sitting here in Islamabad and you're starting business ventures and all on your own, without your family putting you in there and all. With it's your own initiative and all of that. So it's very it's commendable. So let me ask you this then: the 5 people when you were growing up, who were those people who influenced you?
Well, I think that the honest answer is that it took stages for me, and I think it does for everyone, to sort of choose a path and then embark upon it. So I think when I was in Islamabad and growing up and I was an idiotic teenager, I don't think I necessarily had the right goals or motivation or values. I was just sort of moving along, as I think a lot of people in Islamabad tend to do. But everyone in my school was trying to go away for university. I didn't have a particular interest in it, but one of my sisters, actually an older sister of mine, was very helpful in motivating me and helping me to get the applications out. And that ended up in me going to Minnesota. And I think from there onwards, at different stages of my life, there were different people who were probably a little bit further ahead in whatever area I was in, whether it was a senior when I was a freshman at university or whether it was a more senior banker when I became a banker.
Would you say maybe some teachers or professors had an impact?
Yeah, certainly. There were professors in college that were inspiring to me. One person that was inspiring to me within my family was my brother-in-law, who was a banker. He was a few years older than me, so I learned a lot from him, and he has always been a guide and a mentor to me.
Right, okay. So, all right, so here you are then in investment banking in New York City.
Yeah.
We know what a fast-paced environment
Sure.
that is. Tell our viewers a little bit about it. What was your life like over there, and what were you know, how was it different from this slow-paced life in Islamabad, where nothing really, I mean, in the sense that a lot happens, but
Sure.
nothing really happens,
Sure,
you know?
sure.
And then you're in this big city,
Yeah.
New York,
Yeah.
so working. Minnesota and New York also have a big contrast.
Very much so, yeah.
Tell us a bit about that life of yours.
New York was amazing. I mean, I moved there when I was 24, and I don't think there's a better age to move to a place like that because you get such exposure to different things you can be doing. Your skills can develop so fast. You learn about people. I mean, it's so densely populated, and people from all over the world are coming there that you're exposed to whatever you want. Like in New York, you can have anything you want at any time of the day, and so. That can be a bad thing, of course, but if you choose the right circles and you're in the right things, that can be tremendously inspiring. I mean, I learned more from colleagues and from clients as a banker than I learned anywhere else. And so I think what New York does is it's a very, very tough test. You work all hours of the day, and if you're not willing to work all hours of the day, there's somebody who would very happily take your place. So because the competition is increased, the reward is increased, and the people around you are all of a very high caliber, you either fail, or if you float, then you up your game. And what you
Right.
find is, you know, just like the name of your program, the sky's the limit. You can actually continue to develop. We all have the capacity within us. And so I think that allows you to find the things within yourself that can be exceptional, whether it's because you're very hardworking or you happen to have a real knack for one area of business, or if you're a doctor and you're really good at a specific profession. New York is an unforgiving place, and that's a good thing because it always ensures that people are pushing as hard as they can at any time.
Right. Now, we in Islamabad, we're used to a very kind of steady, slow-paced life, you know, the 9 to 5 or even less working hours than that, and we sleep early and get up early. Now, New York City has no timings. I mean, especially where you're in investment banking or banking, you have to be on the same clock as all the different exchanges all over the world and stuff. So for someone like you, adjusting to that fast-paced life and giving up sort of the creature comforts of home life and just, you know, the amount of leisure time that we have in Islamabad suddenly just changes around and it's the opposite. How did you adapt to that?
Look, I mean, I think that it depends on the person, right? For me, it was a gradual process because I actually went from Islamabad to Minnesota, which was a slightly different pace of life, but it was still relatively easy as a transition. I then moved to London, which was again a step more
Slower.
well, it was faster than Minnesota, but then ultimately ended up in New York. And for me, you know, the moment I got off the plane and went over the Queensboro Bridge and you see the skyline and just the scale of it, and you go into the city, there's this energy, right, that you feel in the city, and it's infective. I mean, you actually, you pick it up. So for me, it felt very natural. I've always been a very ambitious person. I've always wanted to prove myself in whatever I'm doing.
Were you into sports and
A
all
lot.
in college and all? Like what?
In college, less so, but in school, growing up in Islamabad, I did a lot of sports. And that was always the area
Like,
where I pushed myself.
Just elaborate, what sports did you do?
So everything, really. Anything I could play. I played a lot of tennis. I played a lot of cricket. And then also in Beacon House, where I primarily went to school, we had athletics every year. There was an interregional games where we would all get together and we would, all the branches of the country would compete with each other. We had 3 regions. So that was a big event for us, sort of socially and culturally. We all sort of aspired to do well in it. It was very motivating, and I'd say that, you know, sports taught me more about life and how to succeed than any sort of book education that I ever went through. So I think that was a fantastic program they had. That certainly helped me. And for me, success, and when I say success, I don't mean material success or money or necessarily proving myself to people, but more proving myself to myself was always extremely important. And I think those people who just feel a sense of security in what they're doing, that with that 9 to 5 and the creature comforts, become much more important then. For me, that was never something that was satisfactory. I always believed that I had something to go out there and I would do something amazing.
Right.
I think if you believe that and you try hard, then you can learn.
So that's kind of, it's showing that you're also a self-driven kind of a person. So that's why you managed to fit in and settle in quite well in that sort of a life in London and New York. I mean, you were in London before you were in New York.
That's right. I was there for 2 years before.
Okay, so tell me a bit about that experience. That compared to Minnesota is again, you know, a huge difference.
Yeah.
So
I'd say one thing that I really benefited from in my college education in the States was they have two systems of education there within the college undergraduate area. They have specialized education, which is more akin to what we have in Pakistan and what we have in the UK. And then they have something called liberal arts.
Yeah.
And the college that I went to was a liberal arts college. And I think that even though I didn't understand it at the time, liberal arts is a fantastic program because what it says is, yes, you major in whatever you're specializing in, but you also have to complete requirements in general education in other areas. So you end up learning about art history and you end up developing critical thinking skills and
literature,
especially
philosophy,
everything.
this, that,
And you sort of choose from this menu of things. And while it doesn't feel very relevant at the time, what you end up developing is a much more well-rounded individual.
Yeah.
They also focus on the skill sets that they're trying to
Yeah.
develop, and I think that's critical. I think one reflection that I see is in our professional life and the people that I come across in organizations here is they're lacking, they're a reflection of the education system in Pakistan because they lack critical thinking skills, right? This whole ratta system, which you go and you sort of memorize what you have to do and you get the numbers, that's not relevant, particularly in the Google age, right? All the information is available to you. It's just about how you disseminate it and how you apply it. So to me,
Yeah.
I think those critical thinking skills are really key, and I think I gained those a lot during that liberal arts degree.
and how do they build those critical thinking skills? Because are there exercises that are done? Because I had a British education after Pakistan, and how is it different? Because my son is studying in the United States right now,
Okay.
and I'm seeing it with him.
Yeah.
But how do they draw out that personality and bring out that confidence?
That-
because that is some other thing altogether which you don't see.
Look, again, I think we're all a function of the people around us, right? So there's a culture and a place, and it sort of infects you, right? So everybody who goes into a new society, they either assimilate to some degree or they become complete outcasts, right? So the culture in America is a very aggressive culture. It's a very entrepreneurial culture. It's a culture where people believe in themselves, and it's much wilder than Europe, right? People are not constrained by social hierarchies as much as they are in this part of the world or in Europe. And so I think that really infects you, and you start to believe I can do anything, right? And you start to understand how people get into whatever their career is, right? How are they trying to be the best? Because there's a culture of excellence in America, right? There's many problems with America, don't get me wrong. But one thing that they've done, at least in the past, is they believe in American ingenuity. They believe that they can take any problem and they can break it down and they can create a process or a product that's going to solve it. And that's a fantastic culture to have because you don't accept things the way they are. So I think that certainly had an impact on me.
Right, and also I found the social inclusivity that everybody, no matter whose child they are, and you know what background they come from, has the same exact opportunity. I know we're seeing a lot of issues right now with the movements with racism and all, but other than that, it doesn't matter what occupation your parent had.
Yeah.
You can still be the most successful person in the world, and you'll be seen as such. You know.
Look, I mean, you can. I think the reality is we are all a function of where we came from, right? And so that's going to impact your horizons in the sense that it'll develop your worldview. And it's often the part of it that you're not actually conscious of that is shaping it the most, right? Because the interactions you have with people, how you perceive different paths in life will be influenced by how you were raised, right? We
Yeah.
can't help that. So if you're raised in, you know, a lower income neighborhood in East LA versus you're raised in a nice place in Connecticut, you're going to have a different worldview and you're going to have different peer groups around you doing different things that will influence you. But certainly there are no social constraints on you progressing. I can attest to the fact that in Wall Street, nobody cared that my name was Mohammad Hadi. Nobody cared what color skin I had. They cared about how well I performed in the
Yeah.
job. And if I did very well, then I could go as far as I wanted. And if I didn't, then I'd be out. It didn't matter whose son you were.
Yes, an example right there that I can remember is one of my bankers in the U.S. when I was living there. He was quite a senior banker, but his father was a gardener outside. And it was one of those things that he was very proud of telling, and he was just like, that's the kind of opportunity that that country gives you.
Societies that work are meritocracies, right? It can happen in any form. I'm not necessarily advocating democracy or or communism, whatever. But if there's not a meritocracy in a society, then you are going to fail, right? Because if the best people can't rise to the top,
Yeah.
then you're going to get the worst people running large institutions.
And everyone should have the same chance,
100%.
no matter who they are, where they're
100%.
coming from. Exactly. So now you're talking about the different culture in Europe and England. How did you find that to be different?
So I had a lot of exposure to the UK growing up. My mother's from England, and then I also would vacation there every couple of years. So I knew England pretty well when I went there for university and later on to work. And so there's always an aspect of sort of London that it feels a little bit like home. But definitely I felt that the culture was more constrained. I felt too restricted. And I still feel that about British culture. I think it is too hierarchical, and people feel like they have to act as a cog within a machine, like they have to be a team player. And the society sort of judges you if you're not a good team player. Whereas American culture says, you know, go out and be brilliant and we'll figure it out. So that's a very different aspect or way to look at life. And I'm not saying that only the American culture is right. The UK has built, you know, arguably the most successful empire in modern times through that culture, right? So they must be doing something right. But I certainly found it a very different way of looking at life. And I spent a couple of years in London, but I wanted to go back to the States, so I ended up moving to New York.
And the education system, if you compare the two, in the UK you have to know right away what you want to be. And when you enter a program, you have to see it to the end.
Yeah.
There's no changing majors and things like that. Whereas in the United States, you declare a major, but you can change it and all. You don't have to decide
That's right.
much later on what you want to do in life.
That's true, and I think that's a good thing as well.
Yeah.
But I also think that, you know, when you look at the academics, American education is terrible. So when you look at like the education that my peers in my undergraduate had received at high school level was a joke compared to what I'd done in A-levels, right? So their academic standards are very low, but somehow they're instilling the right culture in those kids. And then conversely,
culture for success.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then so conversely, you know, the UK I think is much better at driving those standards of academics, at least historically has been, and perhaps could do a little bit more towards building a culture of success. So I think it's somewhere in the middle that probably works well between the two, and that's probably why people coming from education systems that have more of a focus on academics, who've spent their whole childhoods being constrained, when they get to the States, if they're good at what they do, they have tremendous success, right? Because you're good at what you do, and then you go in and you learn that culture and assimilate, and it infects you, and you start sort of going for higher goals. That is, that's the best combination.
Right. So two completely different cultures which you experienced. Did you have other exposure internationally before you went abroad, like around the world? Did you travel a lot as a child and see things and see people and say, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to be?
So I went to the UK a lot. I went there every couple of years for vacation. When I was very young, I lived in Kuwait, but I don't really remember that, so I can't really say that could have influenced me very much. But I had a family that was fairly international, and so I would see what people were doing overseas, and I kind of grew up within that culture in Pakistan, where you're listening to you know, Western music and watching Western movies. So I had an exposure to it. It wasn't sort of a complete culture shock. There were aspects of it, of course, that don't come across in movies and songs, and you have to learn them when you get there. But I wouldn't say that it was, you know, a massive something I'd never discovered before. So I think I had that advantage. But more than that, I would say that you know, each person has their what they believe in, what they tend towards. As a teenager, I actually was much more. I suppose, in some ways resistant to Western culture, and I was a great believer in Pakistan and in cultural values and so on and so forth. And so it took me going there and living there to start to learn what aspects of that culture, of that society, of those values that could apply really well in Pakistan.
Right, so you have your Pakistani values, yet you take the best from those cultures, and the exposure helps in terms of adaptability, because then you're not kind of like suddenly thrown in a
Really,
place
yeah,
where you're
100%.
not sure
I
of
think,
what
look, you can be wrong on the other side. You know, you come across Pakistanis in the States or in the UK who assimilate too fast, and they sort of are faking it, and that doesn't work either. It has to be a natural process, and oftentimes they don't understand sort of the underlying values between the actions they're carrying out. So I think that it's just a question of, you know, what resonates with you individually. On a societal level, look at any society that's come up, right? Whether we look at China in most recent history, or whether we look at ancient civilizations, every single one of them has borrowed from previous civilizations that were successful. Nobody reinvents the wheel unless they have to. So the question is, what parts of the culture, what parts of society, what parts of the economics do you want to borrow because they are examples of excellence? I don't think it's right to just be a monkey and everyone starts speaking English and pretend we're Western. There's no There's no truth in that. But equally, we can't resist things that are clearly successful, and that's what the Chinese have done, right? They've taken technology, sometimes in ways they shouldn't have, but they've taken best practices, they've taken the ways to organize their economy, and they've incorporated, and as a result, they've brought 800 million people out of poverty in the last 30 years. It's unprecedented. So I think that's how we have to look at it, is we don't have to give up our religion, we don't have to give up our culture, we just have to give up things that are not productive in our society, and let those aspects of successful countries infect us and assimilate with them and absorb them into our society.
Absolutely, right. Okay, so now moving forward to, okay, so then you went from England back to New York, you were an investment banker, and then you make a decision to move back to Pakistan after having that life over there, which is a fast-paced life. Like you said, you have everything you need at your fingertips, and it's a successful life, you can say, because it's a high-earning job and everything. So what makes you drop all that and move back to Pakistan, where, let me add, what is the year you came back?
Well, I moved here last year.
Last year.
I left the States in 2017 and moved to Dubai for 3 years. So I did it in stages, right? I don't think that the full jump off the cliff was something I was able to do, but I gradually moved back to the East. Dubai is a nice sort of halfway house, if you will. And then I eventually came to Pakistan. The motivation...
First to Dubai, then back.
That's correct, yeah. And so the motivation for the move was twofold. It was partially family reasons. I wanted to be close to my parents and be around. I knew friends in New York who had not done that and regretted it, and it was something I didn't want to live with. I think that's very important. And that's kind of the immigrant problem, right? Do you move your parents over? Some people do that. Do you move back, or do you just stay apart? So I felt that, you know, I needed to be here or be close, so that's why Dubai initially and then ultimately Islamabad. And then on a professional level, you know, banking had been tremendously interesting. I'd learned a lot from it, and I would advocate that for anyone who has entrepreneurial aspirations, first go and learn. Because there's far too many 22-year-olds who have no idea what they're doing, who are trying to build businesses, right? It's almost like when you get a CEO, a LinkedIn request these days, and it's a CEO, it's almost like a bad thing, right? Because it's like, well, you're calling yourself the CEO of a company because you're not doing anything. So I think you really need to build that skill set. So I felt like I'd built a skill set, and I had this bug that I just wanted to make a change in Pakistan. I wanted to have an impact, and to me, having that impact was best executed through technology, and that's why I went towards a technology startup. It was a gradual process of learning the market, understanding what worked, talking to friends, etc., and ultimately choosing something and then executing it. So that, you know, to me there was sort of this, let me put it this way, the risk return of the path that I'm now living is much higher than that of being a banker. And that inspired me.
Because the banking industry has had its own crises.
Sure, it's had problems. There's never any path that is completely secure. So you're going to have ups and downs in anything. And I suppose a big realization for me was living in New York and realizing it's oftentimes not what you want, but realizing what you don't want that gives you the most direction. So I realized that if I kept working in banking for a few more years, and you know, it's hard work. You're traveling a lot. You've got a lot of pressure on you, and make it through that and buy the house in Connecticut with a 2-car garage and 2.5 kids, I would be miserable. Like, that's not what I wanted from my life, right? So I decided, like, you know,
that's the American dream.
That's the American dream, and for some people that works, and for those that it works, and that's the place that they want to step off the train and settle in. Great for them. I'm not saying that's the wrong path, but I think, you know, success in life comes from aligning your motivations, your values with what you do, and that's a lot easier said than done. So I think it takes time to understand oneself. Right. We oftentimes imagine that we are different people than we really are. And then having the strength and the opportunity to embark upon a path that reflects what your values are. I think that's really the essence of happiness in life. If you're doing that, you'll be happy no matter what you're doing.
Right.
So it's not necessarily that, you know, being in banking or being a startup founder is the right path. It's just what is congruent with who you are. So to me, you know, being a banker into my later years was not something that was appealing. I'd done it, and I'd had a great time doing it. I'd learned a lot, and it'd been a phenomenal experience. But I had this, you know, patriotism or this itch or this idea that I could have an impact in Pakistan, and that's what inspired me to come back and try this.
See, okay, now what I want to ask you next is, okay, when you arrive in Pakistan, there's a completely different culture, and you suddenly have to put your brakes on, because as overseas Pakistanis who have returned ourselves, this is what I've seen, and a lot of people have experienced, that a lot of times you need to use contacts and this, that you're not used to in New York and London. You don't have any concept of, you know, Sefarish, and you don't have any concept of a family family member making a phone call for you. You just do it through your own applications, right? So here you see this culture. How did you adapt to that?
Okay, so the first thing I would say is I think that networks work everywhere. Okay, there isn't a society in the world where having a network that can put in a word for you will not be of use. The U.S. functions like that, so does the U.K., right? So if you want that next job or you want that next business deal, whatever it may be, it's always better if you're getting referred in by someone versus going in cold. Now, what that doesn't mean is that you don't deserve the job and you get it because you're so-and-so's son or so-and-so's nephew, right? So again, going back to my earlier point, meritocracy is very important. It shouldn't be a case that you get it and you don't have the merit. It just means it opens doors, okay? So yes, Pakistan functions, I guess the network effect is much more important in Pakistan. If you're lucky enough to have a good network, you can utilize that. And it's important to build up a network. I needed to build up a network coming back after 20 years. And certainly it was a culture shock more to come back than my actual initial move there. So I would say that I had actually discouraged people coming back. And by the way, there's a term for this now. One of the venture capitalists here in Pakistan coined the term. They're calling them Wapistanis.
Wapistanis,
right? So
I've heard that.
If you're a Wapistani, I would highly discourage you to change your values and change your standards to adhere to what is working in Pakistan. Right? And that will cause friction, you will annoy people, you will fail, but ultimately
people will hate you.
Some people will hate you, but if you're coming to win a popularity contest, fine, maybe you should go with whatever they say. But you have to understand that if you've learned best practices in another economy that have worked for you, believe in that and go with it, and you'll shake things up here.
But don't you feel you're kind of swimming against the tide and it's an uphill kind of a battle?
Of course you are, and that can often be the most rewarding way of swimming, right?
Okay, right, okay.
You've got to bring people to your standards, and that's not easy. And of course you've got to make compromises here and there, but there are areas where you cannot make compromises. You have to expect people in your organization or your business partners to act a certain way. You have to understand that people are going to be slower, or people are not going to interact with you the same way. They're not as straightforward as, say, in New York. But you just have to run your own behavior in that way that you believe in.
Right. How did you and Ali Moeen meet and finally decide that here we are in Pakistan, we're not going to go looking for a job in Islamabad, with some government department or something. We're going to start our own business, which is really something very, very risky and uncertain for the future. But, again, it gives you all that freedom. So how did you decide
So
that?
Ali Moeen and I were great friends in school. So we knew each other, extremely well. We had complete trust in each other. That's very important with founders. And once we got out of high school, out of our A-levels, we then embarked upon our respective undergraduate careers. Both of us went to the States, to different parts. He studied there, and so did I. He worked a few years and then came back. I kept working in the States. He had a very successful career in software development here. He ended up building a company that was building software products for U.S. enterprise clients like NASA and the U.S. Army. And I think just over the years, both of us would keep exchanging notes. We'd see each other every year or so. We'd keep talking on the phone or WhatsApp or whatever and discuss what's going on. I first started getting exposed to technology startups as a banker in New York because I was raising capital for some of the leading U.S. companies. And it gave me an idea, and it took me a while to understand it because I'm not a tech guy, but it gave me an idea about just what the potential of technology is today and what startup ecosystems can do for a country. The impact is like nothing we've seen in our lifetimes, right? It's akin to basically, if you were living in Arizona in the 1880s and they were laying the railroad, right? That was something that was transformative forever. So similarly, what we're transitioning through today is from an old world economy into the information age, right? And that's a huge transition that will impact all of our lives. And there will be winners and losers in that formula, in that equation.
Up till now, what do you think? I mean, we're not talking about your own company right now. What have been the winners in Pakistan which you think have been transformational?
Within technology, there have been a few interesting companies. I wouldn't say that there have been any massive successes yet, and that's due to a few factors. Primarily, there's not that much startup funding available. There's probably not enough people with the experience overseas, but you have people who are homegrown as well, who have just awesome talent and have come up with great ideas. So I'd say, look, you've got a few good companies here for sure that have expanded overseas. There's Zameen.com, you've got Pak Wheels has done pretty well, you've got Naseeb, that group, etc. They've done pretty well. So there's certainly people who've laid the foundation that we can follow. But the thing, again, with technology is that, if that was 5 years ago, the world has changed since then. So that the pace or the direction things are going are always changing. And so you have to sort of understand that there are nuances, from year to year.
And if you look at, say, our neighboring countries, technology companies are huge.
Yeah.
And like, how big can they go in Pakistan?
They can go much, much larger. I mean, I'll give you one data point, right? Daraz was one of the few exits in Pakistan. It was sold for, it's not disclosed, but let's say a couple $100 million. That's the largest e-commerce player in Pakistan, a country of 220 million people. Across the board in India, I think a couple of days after Daraz sold, Walmart made a large investment into one of the largest e-commerce players there. And it was at a $20 billion valuation, right? So if you look at the multiple that you're getting in India, that's not reflective of the difference in population, right? It's a larger economy, so there should be a larger valuation there. However, Pakistan is tremendously undervalued within technology. That means that people investing in this company are getting very, very good deals, right? So that's actually an advantage in many ways, right? India in many ways is overvalued, and for people who want to deploy capital to help grow these companies, to grow this economy, they struggle to find good deals at the right valuations. One of the great things about Pakistan is that you have this combination of incredible demographics. I mean, you've got 220 million people, you've got 80 million people living in urban areas, you've got 150 million people under the age of 30, you've got 86 million 3G, 4G subscribers. That's a massive opportunity. That's like Indonesia 15 years ago. You've got $230 billion of consumer spending, a 22.8-year average age. You have this young population that's very urbanized, there's a strong sense of consumerism and there are so many verticals that need to be disrupted that aren't working as well as they could, and technology is the big enabler that's going to change things, that's going to leapfrog.
Do you think the middle class in Pakistan is financially empowered enough to make a big enough market for all these things?
Absolutely, and increasingly so. So you have sort of 100 million people that are broadly defined within the middle class. That's a massive pot of money. And if you're building products that are accessible to them, as is demonstrated by the success of Careem and Uber in this country within mobility, and many others, you're going to have tremendous business success and social impact.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So you decide to start your own business, and you found your company is called Roemer Technologies.
That's correct.
Right. And you started off as a car rental company. Okay. So tell us.
So Roemer Technologies was always created as something where we were going to build mobility products, something within the transportation space. We believe that the transportation problem in Pakistan and other emerging markets is so huge that there is room for further development. We saw what ride-hailing companies were doing, we saw that ride-hailing companies were having a lot of success, and we thought that there were other models that could work better. So the first product we decided to launch was Roemer, which is Pakistan's first car rental app, and it's kind of a hybrid between ride-hailing and just a pure rental company. So basically we give you the car to take you to Murree or from Islamabad, or we give you the car to go to Lahore, and we charge you a fixed price for it. Or then we can give you a car to just use in Islamabad for 3 or 4 hours.
And this is all through an app?
All through an app, right.
Okay.
And so that was a product that was certainly transformative. It was something new. We were able to grow the company 30% month on month throughout inception to the onset of COVID. We were certainly hit by COVID, as were all the mobility companies. Careem ended up laying off half their staff in Pakistan. Baikia was down to 20%.
There was a lockdown.
There's a lockdown. People are nervous to travel with strangers, and so that certainly impacted us. Having said that, we were able to raise a round of venture capital prior to that happening, and we were able to grow the company pretty impressively. And also what was critical for us was unit economics. One of the problems in mobility, in serving the mobility needs of emerging markets, is that most companies that do it end up losing money, perennially, like forever, right? So if you look at Careem, they are unprofitable. That doesn't stop them from selling the company for $3.2 billion, but they are. Even Uber, right, they lose $1.25 on every ride they do globally, right? So those are bad businesses, okay, in essence. I'm not taking anything away from what they've achieved. It's amazing. But at a core, it's not making money, and it's never going to. The strategy is simply acquire enough users and then become a super app, build in other products that are going to make you money, okay? And that's a great strategy, and it worked very well for a while. There's more of a focus nowadays with venture investors on unit economics. So what really interested Ali and I always was getting real user acquisition instead of just discounting to build as a larger user base as you could, and to build a product that had positive unit economics. So Roemer always had positive unit economics, right? We were making sort of 17-20% net. That's huge in mobility because everyone else is losing money. Similarly, EasyBike, the big driver for us with this product is that it has extremely strong unit economics. So it can be profitable. So you can solve for emerging market mobility needs and still make money, which is unprecedented. And so I think that's the real big opportunity within venture today, within mobility today, that many venture investors are not yet aware of, have not really recognized, is that scooter sharing companies had their issues going on. There are a number of reasons for that in the beginning, but they've refined their model, and now the leading scooter sharing companies in the world are profitable. They've not only grown to where they have hundreds of thousands of scooters deployed, they've also started making a profit. And I know that sounds like nothing, not a very big deal, but within startups, and particularly within mobility startups, that is unprecedented. Right? Within 3 years, you've got the likes of Tier Mobility and Voy and Beam and Bird, Lime, making profits. So we believe we've cracked the code. We believe we have a product that can address the 200 million people in Pakistan who do not have their own vehicles. We only have a 10% vehicle ownership ratio in Pakistan. That is extremely low. It means 90% of the people are focused on, are using public transportation or shared mobility apps for their daily transportation. It's a very large market, right? We estimate it to be about a $3.5 billion market conservatively. And about 8% of it has been disrupted by tech through ride-hailing. But ride-hailing in its four-wheel form, like Uber and Careem, is too expensive for the vast majority of people with an average fare of 220 rupees. That's too expensive for your common man. He can't go on a daily commute when he's earning 30, 40,000 rupees to his work on something that's going to cost him 220 rupees each way on average, right? So what you need lower-priced providers, lower-priced services that are tech-enabled and are able to get people places conveniently. Of course, buses and vans are cheaper than that. It's 40, 50 rupees, but it's extremely inconvenient, right? It takes you an hour plus, it's uncomfortable, etc. So the huge opportunity we have is, how do you find something that leverages technology to solve the problem of mobility for 200 million Pakistanis, and take that perhaps to other emerging markets in Africa or in other parts in Asia where people have the same problem. You'll never sell that many cars. Right? You'll never sell that many motorcycles. It's impossible. It's unaffordable. That's why there's that few vehicles in the market. Similarly, the government can't build mass transit large enough to cater to all those people without draining the exchequer completely. There's no way you could build that type of a public transportation system. So it has to come from the private sector, and it has to come in a mode that is going to be profitable, that is going to have strong unit economics, that is going to be viable and sustainable as a business. That's what Easy Bike is. Easy Bike is scooter sharing. And the reason it works is it's self-drive. What you do is you take a bunch of these scooters, you buy them, and you deploy them around these urban areas.
Okay, so if I'm an Easy Bike user,
Yes.
now, what would I have to do? Tell us how this works.
So let's explain what it is, right? So Easy Bike is a scooter sharing service. And what that means and why it's different than ride-hailing is you don't have someone come and pick you up. You have vehicles that you, as an Easy Bike registered user, have access to. In this case, it's scooters. Right? These are electric scooters, or sometimes referred to in other markets as mopeds, or the ones that you sit on, right? And they are small vehicles that are excellent for urban travel, right? And you step out of your office, you step out of your house, and you look on the Easy Bike app, and you locate the nearest one, and you reserve it, okay? You get 10 minutes to go to it. You open and unlock the scooter with your app. You just scan a QR code. So it's completely digital, it's completely seamless, there's nobody involved. Before you take your bike, you have to do two things. Number one is you have to get your CNIC, or your national ID card, verified. Okay. And secondly, you need to put money on the account using digital payment. So you use EasyPass or Jazz Cash. You put money on the account, 100 rupees, 200 rupees, and you can then use it. So it's very much a targeted towards the lower middle income segment of our society.
It's very inclusive because you don't need a bank account. You're using EasyPass.
That's right.
And
these people desperately need it, right? There are people who are coming to work in the center of Islamabad or in Lahore and Karachi, and they commute an hour and a half a day, and they give up far too much of their paycheck to get there. So there's a massive opportunity for disruption. There's a massive opportunity for impact, and that's what we believe we've got with Easy Bike, because we can cater to the same segment that ride-hailing is, particularly in its two-wheel form of the bike taxis, and we can make money. We'll keep 8 times the gross profit that they do for catering to the same thing, and price it lower than what somebody can get a bike taxi for. So you're delivering value to consumers. You're giving them a much needed service of going about their daily lives, going to university, going to their jobs at a cheaper and more convenient way. Just because you don't have a driver, you just leave the bikes out on the road at convenient points where there are high demand. That's the game. Okay.
Right. So, okay, how are we ensuring now safety? Because bikes in Pakistan, with the way traffic works and all, you tend to see a very high
Sure.
number of accidents and
Sure.
things like that.
Sure.
So, how do you ensure that those people are going to be responsible, number
Yes,
one, with
yes,
your bikes,
yes,
and number two, with their own safety?
Yeah, well, it's a great question. Look, I mean, there's always going to be some degree of risk in any mobility, right? You can sit on a bus or a train and there's some risk in it. So the question is, how do you minimize the risk? So one thing we do is we have tutorials that teach people about how they can go about their ride. We actually, our representatives on the street will help people understand how to drive it. The first time they're using it, they'll explain how it works. But actually, these are extremely easy to operate. It's not like a motorcycle or anything. You literally just have one thing it's a bike, not a scooter, right? It's like a bicycle.
Yeah.
Okay, so you just have a way to accelerate it using the electric battery, and you just turn it and there are brakes. So if you can ride a bicycle, you can ride this. It's very easy to operate. It's a very lightweight vehicle. You could use proper scooters. We opted to go with bikes because we believe that that's most easy to operate and it's the safest thing for people to do who don't have a lot of experience driving other vehicles. One of the things we love about it is the inclusiveness for women. If you look at the bike taxi market today in Pakistan, it excludes women effectively, right? Because it's a conservative society, 99.99% of women are not going to sit on the back of a stranger's motorcycle and go to work, right?
So are you encouraging women riders in this?
100%,
that
yeah.
They themselves use this bike?
We have
How are
regular
you
women
doing that?
riders, and we love it. I mean, look, it's available to everyone. We're putting them outside metro stations. We're putting them in commercial areas. We're putting them by blocks of flats, and we're advertising it to everyone we can. So it'll happen naturally. And I would expect in Pakistan, the majority of our users will be men, right? That's going to be a function of the society you're operating in. But I think one social cause that we feel very strongly about is, making girls who want to go to university or they want to go to school able to do that in a safe way, do that in a way which is comfortable for them, and have that independence where they can go about their lives and empower themselves. So I think that's a great aspect of Easy Bike.
Right. That's
And then the other
great.
thing, sorry, I just want to add to there is
Sure.
that I think that Easy Bike does that is extremely important. It's often an area that we overlook is the environmental friendliness. These are electric bikes, right?
Okay.
If you look around Pakistan today, 70% of the pollution in the air in Pakistan is caused by vehicles.
Vehicles, yeah.
Right? It's not factories.
No.
So we have this amazing opportunity in Pakistan,
Yeah.
which the government of Pakistan is trying to encourage now, where we can transition into electric vehicles and we can reduce, respiratory illnesses in ourselves and our children. We can make our air cleaner to breathe. We can make our cities cleaner.
Okay, and now the interesting thing is that you started Easy Bike during the pandemic.
Yes.
How has it done during this period of the lockdown and
Yeah.
things like that? How's the business doing?
We've had a phenomenal success. We launched in October. We got 15,000 downloads of our app in the first week alone with a zero marketing budget. We're doing very high utilization rates, much higher than the average globally, meaning number of rides we do per scooter or bike on our platform. In addition, we have about 60% of our rides that are repeat rides, meaning that those customers that come to us are coming back over and over again because they like the service. So those are all great sort of indicators. Now, certainly the lockdowns and the restrictions given COVID do present challenges from time to time. So if a particular neighborhood is locked down, we have to exit that neighborhood. With universities and schools recently being locked down in Pakistan, that means students are no longer there who we were catering a lot to. However, all in all, this is actually, in some ways, one of the reasons we decided to go with it in COVID is that scooter sharing or bike sharing in our case, is socially distanced. It's the only form of shared mobility, if you think about it, the only form of public transportation where you can minimize the risk of infection. You're not sitting in an enclosed space in a bus with 20 other people. You're not taking a taxi or an Uber with someone you don't know who's going around the city all day and could have COVID.
Okay, now in this venture of yours, has the government of Pakistan been helpful at all? Right now we're sitting at the National Incubation Center,
Sure.
and where a lot of startups have started, and it's an area where a lot of new companies have started
Yeah.
off, and entrepreneurs like yourself.
Yeah.
So what has their role been in the growth of this project?
Well, firstly, we actually did our inauguration event here at the National Incubation Center, so they were tremendously helpful.
This is under the Ministry of Science and Technology.
No, this is under the Ministry of Information Technology,
Information
and
Technology.
Telecom. Yeah. So we had the Minister of IT and Telecom, Syed Mohammad Hadi, as our chief guest at our launch ceremony. We had a lot of press. That was very helpful for us in getting the word out. In addition to that, we've now started exploring ways to work with the Ministry of Science and Technology, with Mr. Fawad Chaudhry, who's been very supportive. one of the things we're doing, which is very important to us and I think is very important to the government, think about it, right? A, we're helping to provide transportation to those people in Pakistan who need it the most, right?
Yeah.
Lower middle income people who have to go through all kinds of hardships to go about their daily lives. We're empowering them. We're helping the economy to work. We're doing it in an environmentally friendly way, so we're reducing air pollution. We're empowering women, right? And in addition, we've taken the step of not buying our bikes from China. We deployed an initial fleet that was Chinese made to test it out. We assembled them here in Pakistan. And then what did we do? We worked with several producers in Pakistan to come up with a Pakistani-built bike.
Wow.
There's some parts that are
So
imported.
this is a Pakistani product?
The ones that we'll be deploying in Q1 of next year will all be Pakistani going forward. So we're going to create manufacturing jobs. We're helping to incubate the electric vehicle industry in Pakistan. And I think that's a huge opportunity for the country. So inshallah ta'ala, we'll be having an economic impact on the country as well. So there are financial reasons to do this, and there are social reasons to do this, and that inspires us a tremendous amount. As a banker, I don't believe that you can do a lot of good with purely nonprofits, because, and I'm not taking anything away from people who are in nonprofits, it's great, right? If you're doing charity work, it's wonderful, it has its place in society. But if you want to create change at scale, there has to be a profit motive. It has to work, because that's what brings people and resources to the company and to the cause. So I think that if you can have something that has this impact as well as the bottom line of dollars and cents, that's tremendous, which is why we're so excited about it.
Right. Now, your startup raised a six-figure dollar investment early this year, and it has created more than 1,000 jobs. So job creation that we were talking about, employment, this is entrepreneurship, startup companies, small companies. This is what generates employment in the country. How important do you think your role is right now in creating employment?
It's not important enough. We'd like to be much larger, so we're creating more jobs than that. And I think that there is a tremendous opportunity both in the manufacturing sector, as I was talking about, and in the service industry, whether directly through our employees or through an ecosystem you create of people who work with you, for example, people who charge your batteries of your bikes. You can create employment, you can create revenue. And the key thing is to be able to bring capital in from overseas, capital that recognizes the opportunity here to make money, right? That's ultimately what they're looking for. They're venture investors overseas who are putting money in Indonesia and India and other countries, and you say to them, look at Pakistan. This is a gold mine that nobody's aware of, right? There are amazing demographics here. There are 86 million 3G, 4G subscribers. That's a very large market, right? So if you can create the right products and you have the right teams and you have the right models, then you are going to be successful. So we want to bring a lot of capital, tens of millions of dollars into the market from overseas investors.
So
and
attracting foreign investment,
Yes.
that's another role
A
that
huge
you're playing.
part. Yeah, that's a huge motivation.
And so far the funding that you've acquired, what was that through? Was it Pakistani sources? Was it through Pakistani banks?
No, we just raised it on our own through our personal networks, and it was primarily angel investors overseas who are Pakistani origin.
Okay, that's very interesting. So here we have, job creation, like you were saying, attracting foreign investment, and then the transportation sector. This is going to have a huge impact, businesses like yours. Talk to us a little bit about that, because there is a huge problem with transportation in our growing cities. We're in Islamabad right now, but you also have Lahore and Karachi, where you have crazy transportation problems. And we have a huge exploding population. And like you said, mass transit is very expensive. So getting people from one place to the other, companies like yours, how can you help solve that problem?
Well, let's try and define the problem and quantify it, right? So you've got 200 million Pakistanis that do not own a vehicle. Right? They're dependent upon public transportation or a shared vehicle to go about their daily lives. And that's difficult, right? So what can you do to solve their problem? Number one, you could sell them cars. You can't buy that many cars, and they can't afford them anyway. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, the public sector could build mass transit. That's not affordable for the country, right? So what you need is the private sector to come in and you leverage technology for all these smartphone subscribers, give them a product which is affordable and convenient, right? Easy Bike is the most affordable, convenient shared mobility service in Pakistan today. And so that's where we think we can come in, is we can build an ecosystem of transportation using private sector money in Pakistani cities and other emerging markets eventually. But what you want is you want to have in Lahore that someone gets out of bed in the day, they want to go to work or they want to go to university, and they know that in their neighborhood there will be an Easy Bike available that they can book and rent. They go and they share it, that vehicle with 20 other people in that day. And when you're doing that, that means less vehicles on the road, because we're all sharing it for the amount we need, less pollution created because it's electric, right? Less traffic issues and congestion issues.
And noise.
There's no noise, absolutely right.
Noise,
So you've seen it work across the world. It's worked in India, it's worked in China, it's worked in Europe, It's working in several other countries where people have deployed millions now of scooters in shared models, different types of scooters, and with different results. And there have been winners and losers, as in any industry. But the opportunity to create impact within transportation and the need for it in Pakistan is extremely large. And we believe we have the only viable model to do it because we're using self-drive, because you're not paying for the resource that is going to drive that vehicle. When you pay for the resource, if you do it with technology or otherwise, it becomes unsustainable because they cost too much. There's not enough supply, right? So when a ride-hailing company charges me 100 rupees for a ride, they give all of that to the supply because they need to in order to ensure that somebody will pick up my ride. What we have that we can work with is a much, much better unit economics because we can rent the fleet for much less than that.
Right.
And then we can make money doing it. When you make money doing it, what does that mean? We can put more profits into expanding. We can attract more investment. And so we think that we have something that's viable. And inshallah ta'ala, in years to come, we'll find that in Pakistan, it's just part of life. Right? Easy Bike is there, people use it, they don't have to worry about buying the next motorcycle or the next car.
It's going to be the norm. And you're basically serving the common man, which is a great thing to do, you know, because they're the ones who need it. Now, to conclude, as we, you know, program is coming to an end, where do you see yourself in the next, say, 10 years? Do you see yourself as like one of the giants of the industry in Pakistan? And anything you want to share with our viewers that you think is important for them to know, any inspiration you want to give to them, we'd like to know from you.
Sure. Look, as far as where we go, none of us can say where things will go. But to me, Easy Bike is a phenomenal idea. I believe it's something which will grow rapidly. And so, yes, I do expect that it'll be one of the giants of the tech industry in Pakistan. And by 10 years, I would hope that it's a Pakistani product that's being exported to other emerging markets. And I think that would make me tremendously proud if we could do that. As far as general, you know, words for anyone, I think, look, what works for each person is different. It depends on your personality, and I think a large part of success in life is determined by figuring out who you are and what inspires you. But one thing that I would say is that, you know, it's a very strange mixture of ambition and humility that is going to get you the furthest, right? The humility to be able to look at yourself and see what you're doing wrong, see where you're weak and where you need to develop, and the ambition to say, I want to do more, right? It's not enough to just get to a certain point, then sit back, okay, I'm a doctor now, or I've got a piece of real estate now, and I'm done, right? Think about what's your legacy, what are you going to leave behind, and how can you conduct yourself in your daily life where you hold yourself to higher standards than others. You should always be holding yourself to higher standards than others, because if you do, you'll probably perform better than them. If you just allow yourself to be average, you'll have average returns in your life. So I think one thing that was tremendously inspiring for me as someone exposed to New York and thrown in the deep end was seeing how people held themselves to high standards. They were very ambitious, and the way they conducted themselves was always at the highest degree of competency.
Right, okay.
And I would say that if you can implement that in your own life, if any of us can, it's a constant struggle for all of us, then we can have tremendous success.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much, Hadi, for these very inspiring words for our viewers and for all of us as well. And we wish you the best of luck in the future.
Thanks very much for having
changing the whole landscape for the common citizens of Pakistan, which is a wonderful service that you're doing. And we wish you all the success. And we hope to see you doing really well and having more programs like these and showing you growing bigger and bigger in the future, inshallah.
Inshallah. Thanks so much for having me.
Right, thank you. And that brings us to the end of our program. You just met one of our guests, Syed Mohammad Hadi, one of the future leaders of industry and business in Pakistan. As you can see, they've brought this brand new company to Pakistan. They're the founders, him and his partner Ali Moeen. And this is something, a new concept in Pakistan. Obviously, you see these kind of companies in other parts of the world, but to bring it to a country like Pakistan where you face certain challenges and all takes a lot of bravery, and it takes a lot of focus and a lot of stubbornness to go forward and make things happen. So I think all of us can learn from this and learn that Pakistan is a place where things can be done, new things can be brought, and you can be successful. And I'd like to join all of our viewers today for joining us today on Sky's the Limit. We'll see you next time at the same time and same day. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.